Today we're going to look at 3D extrusions and looking at different kinds of ways that you can modify and manipulate those extrusions from Photoshop. So what we're first going to do is just start a new file, and we're going to name this just 3D extrusions. We can name it whatever you want to name it in that aspect. So if you come in here, you're going to make this just like an 800 by 600. It's really up to you and dependent on what size you want to do. And what we're going to do is also just make this a web file or web preset. And so it did change my widths, which is easy to change back. Alright, so now we're going to hit OK and come out here, and the first thing you want to do is get your type tool, which is over here on the side, and you're just going to type whatever you want to type. And so I'm going to just type my name. As you see, I've already changed the color preset of what font it's going to be. It just makes it a lot easier when we make it an extrusion to see it in a different color. So, and you just want to make this as big as you can, just so that it's easier to see your manipulations. So the first thing you're going to do is you are going to hit 3D and then new 3D extrusion from selected layer. As you see on this side, I am on my layer, my text layer. So it's going to take this layer and it's going to make the 3D extrusion from that. So I hit that, and you automatically see it change to the 3D plane. It shows the 3D extrusion here. I'm going to change my 3D mode so that I can see the view, and that's just that first one. I'm going to use the orbit, and I'm just going to change the view of the word so that you can kind of see different when we start to manipulate how it's going to look. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is just kind of work through a lot of the properties, and the properties are over here on your right hand side, and we're going to go through these, which as you see, if you hover over them, it's going to show you mesh, coordinates, and mesh, deform, cap, and coordinates. And so let's work on the mesh one first. And so you can change the shadow options. So this is just if it's going to catch the shadows, and you can see if you look right here in the C, you can see the shadow. When I undo it, it no longer has that shadow right there. And then if I re-hit it, it's going to be fine. Same with the casting shadows. That's the overall effect of the shadows, and that's easy to see if you click and unclick. So the first thing that you can do is change the shape presets. And so if you look at these, you can do different, just plain extrude, which is what we have. A bevel look, which I tend to prefer. You have a bevel with a frame, and all these other different options down here that you can just see, and you can just change them to different ways that the extrusion looks. And so this really comes into effect when you look at the 3D print or the 3D printer, and how the edges especially are going to look. Like you see how inflate was different from bevel, where bevel has that hard edge, inflate is very soft and very, as we say, inflated. So if you look, and you can actually go to a lot of really crazy ones like this Twist 390, and it just makes that extrusion extremely interesting. You can see different ways to do it, and it makes the manipulations very different. And you can bend them from the center, and you can just go crazy. So I'm going to keep it on bevel because it's it's my preference. And so you can also, from here, you can change these lists to make it like a text only, and I had it on the large list just so that you can kind of see the picture as well as see the font or the text. So we're going to go down, and our next, and you can actually also, if you look here on this right hand side, you can change the extrusion depth. And as you see over here on the left, you're just changing how far out in space that goes. So you can do that in a positive way, which is just making that extrusion go backwards, or you can do it in a negative way, which makes it go out into that Z space. I'm just going to keep it at about 1.5 inches. It's just so that it's enough where we can see the changes and differences, but it's not too much. So our next one that we're going to do is we're going to do deform, and that's that second option up here. From here, you can also change the extrusion depth, and that's and the shape preset. So really with these, with deform and mesh, you can kind of go through the two just to change those two presets as well. You can also take that extrusion depth and you can twist it in the back. And you can twist it to extreme, you can twist it to a little bit. And we did have that option here in the shape presets with like twist 90, 360, and 540. But this gives you a little bit more options. And instead of just going automatically to the right, you can also go to the left. And that's when it's going to be in the negatives, as when you're going to the left. And the positives is going to be going to the right. So I'm just going to go back to 0 just so that we can see. And then you have taper. Taper is where you take the extrusion and you can make it go outwards or you can make it go in. And as you see, like right now, it's at this 100% right here. And that's fine for now. It really is. But if you want to have some fun and just manipulate them a little bit more, as you see, as you get bigger, that extrusion kind of goes out at an outward diagonal to the right and left, depending on which side you're on. And if you go in the negative, it's going to make it narrow, kind of like it's coming from one center point at the, if you get to the extreme, it's going to come from one center point all the way out to that, your text. It's just another way to manipulate and change your preferences, and it's all based on preferences. So I'm just going to make this back to 100. And from here, you can make your bend. In this box right here is your bend and shear of your horizontal angles and vertical angles. So if we're going to bend at the horizontal angle, you see it's going to take it from that center point, and it's going to move everything by that many degrees. So right now I'm at 51 degrees. And so it's taking the extrusion font, and from that center point, it's making the in go all the way out at 50. This angle is now 50 degrees from the center, or 51 degrees from the center. And from the back of it, it is also 51 degrees. And so it's taking that extrusion and it's just moving it. As you see from the center point, it is, and going out, it is less of an extrusion to the outside point. And that's just because of that angle. It's following that angle line. And so that's how that happens. So let's go back to 0. And you can also do the vertical angle. And that's just going to go all the way out as well. And that's just doing the opposite way than the horizontal. And as you can see, you can get crazy and it just looks like a complete circle here. And you can just manipulate that however you prefer. So let's go back to 0. The next thing we're going to do is look at the cap. And so that's this third button up here. And so if you just click on that, this is going to change with the font face. So as you see, we have this bevel. So this is going to be the manipulation of the bevel and everything else that's in it. So I like to do the front and back just because it's more uniform, but you can decide which ones you want to do from this sides up here. Is you can do front, back, or front and back. And then you can also change, this is where you can change your width of your bevel. So right now I have it at 25%. And if you just want to watch the text up in these corners by the N or by any other letter, that's where you're going to see it the most. And so as you extend it, it makes that bevel more prominent or less prominent. And so if you move each of them, you can move it to whatever extreme you want. So let's just keep it there so that it can help us with some of the angles and the contours later. So looking at the angle, this is showing you how far the bevel itself extrudes from the front face of the font, at what angle. And so you can go extreme and make it this crazy angle that goes all the way out and makes the extrusion itself even wider. Or you can even go inward where it becomes a negative space for itself. So I'm going to keep it at the 45 or close to. And we're going to move on to the contour. So the contour is this, button right here. And if you go down, it has that same just pictures, but I like to change it to the large list because you see the picture and you see what it's called. And so you have all these different changes that it can do. So right now we are on the linear, and the linear is just your basic look at the bevel. So if you can change these to cone, and as you see, it changes the entire front face. And if you were to look at the back, it changes the back face as well. So we're going to keep going and just look at different ones like that. So you can do an inverted cone, which is like it goes into the negative and then it comes back out. You can go into these extremes. This one's a little bit of a softer bevel, and so the half round or the Gaussian, and that's just, these are a little bit softer than just your typical bevel. If you go to the ring double, you see the different like facets of this, and so you see all these multiple rings in extrusions that within the extrusion. All right, and so let's look at a couple other ones. The rounded steps is another one that's really kind of fancy, and it's just got a lot of different properties to the contour. And finally, the sawtooth is very similar to the ring double, but they're depending on your shape and depending on the width and angle of your extrusion, you can actually see a lot of really cool things with it. But again, that's all about your preference. So I'm just gonna go back to the half round. It's one of my favorites. It makes it look a little bit softer. And so now we're gonna look at the inflate, and this just shows, as you see, as I make it bigger or smaller, it just kind of shows the bevel a little bit more or less. All right, and I'm going to go back to what it was, to the 45, and you can also change the strength. And so that bevel, as you see, is extruding even more, or it's completely just going back to normal. And so again, this is just something that you can mess with yourself. And you can reset everything to what its standard is. And as you see, you saw these, when I was moving the angle, you could see that arrow to the side change with it. And so that means like you can just do this from here, is just change this inflation angle and everything from that. Same with your strength, and that's just going up and down. So the last one that we're going to do is to our coordinates, and that's what we taught, what happened when we were going through the 3 new modes in my last video. And so that's just changing the same kind of coordinations and everything else that come with it.